Okay, thanks for joining everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the IACUC Spotlight session. So joined alongside Dr. Zach Callahan from Colorado State University. I'm Hamza Asif, product manager here at Quali for Quali Protocols and Quali COI. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about IACUC and kind of the process that Colorado State went through over the course of, I guess, the last year in their kind of implementation process. We'll learn some about their business process, how they catered some best practices as they implemented, and how they kind of look forward to moving to some other modules as well. So Zach, I will let you go ahead with the introduction and take it from there.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you again, Hamza. As he mentioned, my name is Zachary Callahan. I'm the Quali Project Manager for the Research Integrity and Compliance Office at Colorado State. So I'm not truly the PM or APM, but I help handle the Quali projects along with, obviously, other duties. So just a little bit of background. I've only been at Colorado State, about 2.5 or 3 years. So I'm a relatively new person to research administration. I was a former professor of exercise physiology, but looking forward to, helping folks out with some of these new Quali systems. So just a little bit of a background or introduction there. You can see on the slide, we went live with Quali Cloud IACUC June of 2020. Previously, April of 2019, we went live with the COI module. That was my introduction to Quali. I was, again, sort of the PM for that rollout. So then when we started doing the IACUC rollout, I worked on that. And then as you can see, we are rolling out IRB in a couple months. And so I'm sort of the Quali PM for that process also. And as you can see, we have sponsor programs that we're in the process of working on the implementation for that. Now I'm not involved with that, except sort of as an ancillary. That'll be late this year. And then IBC at some point this year, I hope, or maybe, well, Hamza will have it ready. I don't know about if we'll be ready for it yet, but we'll do IBC and export controls, fully fleshed out at some point in the near future. And I did want to just sort of mention this talk is going to mainly focus on our transition to Quali IACUC. The other gentleman that was going to help with the presentation today was unable to make it. So it is going to be a lot of me. Feel free to ask questions. I am not an IACUC expert, but I will be more than, I can do whatever I can do to sort of help this and sort of go along with the process, again, of how we took our current product and transitioned over, and I'll say successfully, into the IACUC Quali Cloud product last year. So next slide a little bit, looking at our implementation timeline there. I don't know how many of you were able to attend the IRB presentation that Indiana did yesterday, but Lena talked a little bit about their timeline and about their migration process and some of those other things that were involved with that. And so those timelines are going to vary immensely, as you can see, based on size, number of research offices that you may have, and then I don't want to make this a small point, sort of the legacy data transfer. And so just again, to backtrack a little bit, talk a little bit about what Indiana did. They went live with IRB and they migrated their protocols over so they did a data conversion from their current system. And they went sort of a soft go live last summer of 2020, and they didn't go live to campus January of 2021. So even before summer of 2020, that obviously they had to start this process way ahead of time. So they may have been 18 months or even further out from when they first developed a template or started looking at this data migration process to where they are today. And so that's not even just sort of planning the implementation and all that sort of stuff. That's from sort of day one of here's our template, and then here we are today going live. That could be, again, 18 months seems like a long time, but I would venture to guess maybe that's what Indiana did. We're looking at, about a year also for each sort of product is about what it's ended up for us to take. I'll talk a little bit. Oh, there it is. Michelle jumped in. She says October of 2019. So As I mentioned, that's just a huge sort of time commitment and a lot of planning and steps that need to sort of go into place ahead of time to ensure a successful transition. So again, sort of talking a little bit about the sort of the legacy data. Indiana did a data conversion, so they were able to get a data extract from their provider, imported it into their form, and then they spent a lot of time doing a data, verifying that that data transferred correctly, doing some validation. Our provider, we're unable to get any data from them. We can't get any data downloads. So we're going to do a manual protocol migration. So our IRB team is going to take every protocol, every active protocol that we have in the system, which is a little, maybe 1,000 or 1,100, and enter those in manually into the system. So that's sort of the process that we have. And as you can imagine, that's a huge time crunch and a whole bunch of person hours that we have to commit to. So when you're thinking about this migration process, again, Indiana and ourselves, CSU, we have familiarity with Quali, so that we also have to take that into consideration, that we have people that are familiar with the forms that can do some additional work on the templates, modifications, that sort of thing in the preparation as it's going forward. So that's, again, something to consider when you're sort of looking at this sort of the timelines and that sort of thing. In the business process analyst, you can see, right, we've got protocol volume is hugely important, the departmental sizes. I mentioned, the legacy data that we were unable to get, but we did go through and do a cleanup of the legacy form. So prior to having Quali sort of translate that over to our current form into their system, we wanted to make sure that it looked pretty good. And then also, within that, then we also have to sort of think about the team structure. So you have, obviously, you have IRB, your coordinators and your chair people and all that sort of stuff. So you've got a whole host of folks that are going to be involved in this process. And you also have the information systems or IT people. And we have a research services team that also acts as a sort of a conduit between our information technology people to help us with some of this. So there's a lot of sort of folks that are involved with this process and getting a good understanding of those team structures, who's going to be doing sort of what. And then, as I said, developing your migration process. So exactly what are you going to do? What are you going to migrate? In the IACUC module, we had planned on doing a little more migration than we did, but as you see, we went live last summer. Also, last summer was COVID. So we had planned on going live, and then we actually had to do a pause because the people that were going to help with our migration process actually got pulled. One had COVID and one got pulled into another project. I trained a couple other folks to do the migration process. They got pulled into another COVID project. So we got delayed just in the migration process just because, again, of personnel. So nobody could have anticipated COVID, but that's sort of an idea, making sure that you have the personnel that are there, what that process is going to look like. What are you going to able to get from your data provider? Are you going to be doing a data conversion and then have to do a bunch of work on the back end confirming that data conversion? Are you going to be doing sort of a manual process like we are? As I mentioned, we have about 1,000 protocols. And so, we may have 400 or 500 hours in this migration process, which is, just a huge amount of personnel to sort of think about when they're also doing their normal job. So that's sort of hard to think about. Any questions about that? Okay. All right. We'll talk a little bit about communication. So as I mentioned, the communication is going to be super important because you have a lot of different folks that you're going to be interacting with. And so who's going to be responsible for communication? So is it campus communication? Is it internal communication within your group? Is it communication within the, so like, for instance, with IACUC, within the IACUC committee, how are they going to be involved in reviewing that process and being involved in what that process is going to be involved? And again, as I've said, sort of across campus communication, as far as release dates, the new system, turning off the old system, what that process is going to involve, what are researcher expectations, what's going to happen to their current protocols. Are they going to be put in a database that they're going to sort of have access to? Again, for our system, we don't have any data that we can download from them, but obviously the protocols are in their system. Our contract expires the end of June. So the end of June, we will not have any access to any IRB data in theory, as far as users are concerned. So we have to communicate with researchers that they need to print off anything that they would want to print off of that system has to get printed off before it goes dead the end of June 30th. Website updates. So again, who's going to update the websites with information, training timelines, that sort of thing. I don't want to keep talking about Indiana, but they have a really fantastic website that they put up there for their transition to their new IRB module with timelines and sort of that information. Some training documents, also important to have that sort of up there to make sure that all folks can see the information that they need is available. Let's see what else I can think about here.
And so one thing actually I would mention, Zach, while you're looking, is that communication is also kind of a two-way channel, right? So on the Kuali side, during schools that are implementing, our customer success team often works very closely with schools implementing. So I've kind of even sat in just a few meetings with one of our senior customer success managers, Victor, and kind of his implementation process with a few schools. And so this communication, I mean, it goes through everything from sort of new product updates, which I think we'll talk about in a few slides, and just sort of general template changes, right? And kind of adhering to best practices that Kuali recommends so that schools can sort of implement, hit the ground running, and have a smooth kind of operation in managing their protocol volume and their life cycle.
Yeah, so Hamza mentioned Victor. Victor was also our customer success manager for our both of these migrations, all three of these migrations, actually, now that I think about it. So we have done a ton of communication with Victor, and he's been super helpful. But it is, again, important to have that line of communication, so that way you have an understanding that if something does come up, who's going to take a look at that, who's going to communicate with Kuali, who's going to get responses back from Kuali, to make sure that all that's, everything is sort of working the way it needs to work to get the product to go live. And as I mentioned, Indiana had September or whatever she said, sometime in 2019 is when she started that for Michelle. So that's, again, a significant amount of time that they've spent communicating with Kuali about what their expectations are, what their system capabilities are, what their personnel capabilities are, right? So all the sort of things that Indiana or CSU is able to offer, we have to communicate that with Kuali to talk about where we can go to be successful in this. And as Hamza mentioned, I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, but one of the sort of important things to think about is we have our business process, but how is that business process going to work with Kuali's product or, our product business process? Was it a product of the system or a product of what we had sort of before the product? So product of the product squared. So something to sort of think about as you're going through this, the communication, trying to make sure that everybody's sort of aware of what's happening with that. And that sort of then leads into, as I mentioned, with communication, we have to think about the training that's going to be involved with that. And so if your campus has familiarity with the other Kuali modules, that training then becomes a little easier for some personnel, but obviously some personnel have still not had much experience with it. So we have the COI module, which looks similar to the protocols module, but doesn't exactly act the same way. So the forms are generally much, much longer in IACUC and IRB. So much more involved form, a lot more training that can be involved with that. Some form guides, if appropriate personnel, to sort of get them involved with the process of the progressive logic that's involved in the templates. A lot of the features that are available, the general, just the sort of, I don't want to say widgets, but like the date picker, the calendar, the text box, a radio box, a radio knobs, buttons, the check boxes, all that sort of stuff comes into play when you're looking at training and setting up this template. And so it's important to have personnel trained in modifying the template, but then also personnel that are well aware of how to do the training, present the training to campus. Again, with COVID, we have to do a lot of this. I had 30 sessions that I spent a long time, because our library does not have a very good scheduling system, trying to get sessions scheduled to do when we went live with IACUC last year, trying to get all those scheduled. It took me hours and hours to go through their little format. And then we had to cancel almost all of them because of COVID hit. So then I had to try to transition everything over to an online system. And as all of you are aware, the online systems, they're nice in some aspects, but it also is much easier if you're in person to do training on a system. If somebody's having a problem, it's much easier to do that. So the training aspect becomes almost larger when you're doing this remotely. So that's, again, something to consider, to think about, who's going to be doing the trainings. Again, you have committee member trainings, you have coordinator trainings, so all of the administrator trainings, then you just sort of have campus trainings. So you have at least three different groups of trainings that you'll have to sort of consider and prepare for in order to, again, be successful with this process. So I've talked a little bit about the template. I just, again, want to go into some more details about what we had to do. I talked about the legacy form, the review and the cleanup prior to the transition. So what we do is we take our form, we try to make sure that it doesn't have any fluff. And then, Quali does their transformation. They put it into the system. We get feedback then from internal teams on the layouts, what they want to see, what they don't want to see. Maybe as Hamza talked a little bit about, one of the things that Victor mentioned when we were talking about our migration was that we were only one other school had asked for one of the features that we had. And strangely enough, they also happened to have the same legacy IACUC provider as what we had. So there was a discussion about, well, what were faculty accustomed to or researchers accustomed to on an IACUC form? And so do we go with what they're sort of familiar with, but maybe doesn't work as well with the Quali form? Or do we work with the form that we have and try to train our faculty, our researchers, so to improve the situation across the board? So again, that's something to consider when you're looking at the template and making those changes. What sort of, the size of your research budget, right, is clearly going to play a role on that. One of the other things I have down here is sort of talking about adapting to new regulations or industry changes. So Michelle mentioned she started the form in 2019. So that was before COVID even hit. So a lot of new regulations, a lot of new changes may have come into play. Even within that, Quali has widgets, they have features that they've added to the IACUC module, and or again, if we think about it, to the IRB module as we prepare to go live with that. So the template that I had last summer is not the template that I'm going to go live with, even if I don't make any changes on our questions or the form or anything like that. As Quali releases new features that we want to put into our template, that template again is not going to be the exact same template that it's from what I had a year ago. In our IACUC environment, I think we're on number 150, and I don't know that number is large or small, but we have 150 previous derivations then of our IACUC template. So there's been a lot of modification that's happened to that template over this period of time. So again, something to think about as you're going through this template process, that it's a sort of a continual living document. And even today, as Quali adds new features, I continue to meet with our IACUC committee. So Michelle's got a quote there or mention there. To this day, I have bi-monthly meetings with our IACUC people to talk about new features that Quali has. What are we going to use? Any possible issues that we may be having with Quali? So even after that communication sort of ends on the beginning, the template work and that communication continues throughout the lifespan of this module. So new regulations that may change, new industry changes, all those things are going to have to come into play, and someone's going to have to be responsible for manipulating that template, being familiar with that template. And so there's, again, something to consider is, is you're going to have a team of folks that are going to be handling that, or is it going to be one person? that sort of a thing. So templates, there's a lot of information that has to happen in the template. Let me see if there were any other notes that I had. Oh, the other thing that I did want to talk about was in the template was sort of setting up your sandbox environments. And we'll talk a little bit about this with configuration, but you have to think about the roles for the personnel, the committees. So all those committees have to get imported in, whether the data feeds are coming. So if you have training data information, a training widget is something that Quali added that's everybody is super excited to have. And we are integrating with City. So we have City trainings that are going to populate our IACUC modules, but then we also have locally hosted trainings. So how do we get those trainings into the Quali widget to show up on our template? So again, continual modification of this template as we go through these, as it sort of goes through this process. So then again, we think about the template. We can think about testing the template. So who's going to be, do we have alpha testers? Do you have beta testers? Is it going to be it's going to be your IACUC committee? Is it going to be some of the IACUC coordinator? Some of the IACUC administrators? So just sort of thinking about who's going to be doing the testing of the template, and then providing feedback. Structured feedback is super essential when you're looking at this. I've done a number of trainings, demos of IACUC, IRB, COI modules. And I know when I just say, hey, if you have any questions or comments, let me know, I get, 0 responses unless somebody's super opinionated about something. But if I send them a feedback form, says, hey, can you comment on this or this or this? You generally get quite a bit better feedback, as you would imagine. And so that's something important to sort of think about with your template, to try to, as you're going through the training, to develop some feedback tools to allow folks to provide some controlled feedback. So the template then, as I mentioned, has a ton of configurations, sorry there, Hams, I did it to you. A lot of configurations, a lot of really cool features, and a lot of stuff that changes. You can, within the boundaries, right, you can make the form sort of look like what you want it to look like and interact the way that you want it to look like. I'm sure a number of you have attended, the IRB session, as I mentioned the other day, but some of the COI module discussion earlier in the week, looking at people's forms and seeing how they configure that, a lot of sort of options. And it's important to sort of leverage Quali's, expertise here to talk to us about what our needs are, and then sort of what their experiences are, and helping us, configure or customize that. Talk about some of the additional features and whether we can use those. So if you're familiar with the IACUC module, there's ancillary review on there. There's checklists, the activity logs. So some of those other configurations that I guess they're not really configurations, but at least becoming familiar with those and using them for your business process is hugely important. Again, Hamza, do you want to talk a little bit about your role in sort of communication with users?
Sure. I think part of the configuration, kind of, especially with schools that are implementing, during kind of the implementational timeline, Quali continues to kind of build and release and ship features, right? So kind of part of this onus, I would say, falls on me to sort of announce new features, provide the necessary documentation. An example of something might be, hey, listen, the Quali team is looking to sort of automate the ancillary review process, right? Should this perhaps take the form of maybe like a gadget on the form? A school like CSU, if they were implementing, would need to know these updates of kind of this feature, what it does, how it functions, what it's intended to do, and then should we actually implement that on our form, right? Because that would require a template update. And so I think part of this relies on product. The other half also kind of hinges on customer success when schools are implementing. So again, kind of call back to Victor, and sort of schools that are implementing now, I've been able to kind of watch Victor closely, work with schools, kind of explain kind of feature instances, how their inception, how they function, and sort of also best practice and best case scenarios on how to use them. It's then, of course, up to the school or the institution to kind of leverage, hey, yes, we'll decide, but we'll kind of decide to use this feature moving forward, or no, let's wait, let's test it out in Sandbox and wait until we implement, right? So kind of in that configuration, there are options. The Quali team tries to stay sort of present and try and inform, I guess, our users as these features are released, and how they might affect ongoing configurations.
Yeah, Hamza talked a little bit about some of the configuration that Quali helps with. So participating sites is, again, something that's a newer feature that's being rolled out, or maybe not newer, but newer feature. So again, how do we configure that? The reviewer checklist, I think you mentioned that. How do we configure those checklists, and can those be used for our business process? And then, as Hamza mentioned, any sort of upcoming product features from Quali that are maybe behind a feature flag that we want to test out in our sandbox and have people say, hey, yay or nay to that. So again, that's a continual process to have this configuration, this discussion with Quali and your folks to see whether you want to add these new features, how do they work within your business processes or not. We're rolling out the IRB modules I mentioned, and I saw yesterday that Indiana has the COI widget in there next to the personnel. So we are, as I mentioned earlier, we have the Quali COI module, so we can import that data directly into our IRB and IACUC modules. And so, maybe we can make the form a little shorter. Do we need to have 7 or 8 COI questions in an IRB form if we already have that information and we can just have it pre-populate, and the user doesn't have to go, why am I entering all the COI information again when it's already been entered? Maybe they just did it the day before. So as continual updates roll out, working with the Quali team, not only Victor, but engineers or Hamza, all those sort of people behind the backgrounds. Jessica, we have a lot of communication with those folks to talk about their product or our product, sort of what we have going on with that. So definitely the configuration is hugely important to think about how that's going to work with not only just the business process, but how it's going to work across the entire campus, which sort of leads me into reporting, I guess. Then if we sort of think about, how we're going to get this information that we have in our system across campus, and reporting, as all of you know, is hugely important, not only in the IACUC world, but in the IRB world. And with IACUC, last year we had to prepare for our ALAC and USDA reports. So we had to determine what data was available from Quali, what data was not available from Quali, and sort of get work started early again on that ALAC report to determine, so that way when it was time to have happen, we didn't just be wandering around crazy saying we don't have anything. So again, preparation, when we sort of look at configuration, that's a little maybe way too technical to sort of think about. Well, but when you're doing your configuration, think about maybe the field labels for ALAC and or for the USDA for reporting, to maybe make it easier for that to happen based on your data outputs. That's something also to think about. We have a separate animal management group that handled all the animal management aspect of our IACUC, and they have a separate system. So we had to sort of get those two systems to communicate with each other. We had to be able to allow them to be able to get some report data from Quali. I had to do some training with the AMS people so that they were familiar enough with Quali that they could go in and access the system and look at something if they weren't able to get the report or get the data from the report. So a lot of things to sort of think about within that. Also, then you obviously have internal reporting across your various committees. So what sort of data does your university want? What sort of data does your boss want? So all sorts of things to consider when you're looking at reporting. And again, leveraging the expertise that Quali has to talk with them about SciSense or some of the other, some of the things that we're able to do with them as far as reporting. Hamza, do you have anything else you want to talk about on reporting?
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to reporting, so we do have our wonderful reports engineer, Greg, who we decided to make work across all the different kind of compliance products. But reporting updates, that kind of falls under kind of the product team, right? So myself or Marisa will generally report on reporting. We work closely with various kind of CS members as well. So reporting updates, right, kind of as they come out, being able to kind of gauge functional needs from schools. This also falls on the quality team. And when those kind of reports are in process, right, or those updates are in progress, then we can kind of communicate back and forth and kind of gauge feedback, and that helps build out reporting as well. So I will actually.
And then the other note you can see on there is sort of looking at reporting, again, thinking about roadmap updates or what Quali has sort of planned to think about, do we need to develop this in-house report immediately, or something that, that Quali looks like that they're going to have available for us. So again, communication with Quali and sort of thinking about what they're able to offer, super beneficial, super helpful. And then I think the last slide, that we talked a little bit about some of these features, but I didn't want to sort of, let this slide without sort of talking about Quali and what they're sort of able to offer to the user. And I know a number of you have had experiences with these, the user groups, the community forums, Quali days that we sort of have here. It's hard to not bring up all these sort of resources that we have available. Hamza, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. But again, I think leveraging these kind of quality resources as well, right? And so Quality Days obviously is just once a year, but myself and our senior product designer, Aaron, we've been able to meet kind of, with a select few users across sort of the R&D lab. So it's a great way to kind of give feedback, sort of one method. But again, so user groups, right? So shameless plug here, but the protocols user group is coming up. So you can look forward to maybe chatting with me soon. Leveraging kind of the user group, attending those. They're sort of on a quarterly cadence now. The Zendesk community forum lives both for sort of new feature feedback, business process discussion among schools. And then there's always a support channel, right? So Jess and Nancy are sort of super active there, and they kind of respond as quickly as they can. So all these things, I think, sort of informational channels to help guide users where they need to get to during kind of either the implementational phase or as schools have gone live with the product. And sort of that next bullet point there is just the quality product team announcing new features, right? And so again, I sort of had touched on this earlier, but a lot of that onus does fall on me to kind of release new features, time them, provide the necessary documentation on how they function, what they're intended to do, and then also sort of pair with customer success or customer support to sort of turn these features on in sandbox environments, right? Let schools kind of test and play around with them, and then kind of ultimately implement them or adopt them when they choose or when they feel like they're ready.
Yeah, and so it's just been, I am, as I mentioned, relatively new at Colorado State and relatively new to research administration as an administrator, sort of. And so it's been super helpful to have Quali's resources. I'm not trying to make Hamza feel any better or anything like that, but I've been working with Quali now for almost 2.5 years, and I can't say that I've had any truly negative experiences at all with anyone from Quali. And I'm sure most of you would echo the sentiment that Quali's been super helpful. Everybody's been everyone's always friendly and helpful. So that's greatly appreciated. And as Hamza mentioned, I met with, after Quality Days last year, I met with Aaron to talk about this the IACUC rollout that we were sort of trying to get going last year at Quality Days. So it is nice and helpful to have those folks that you can reach out to, not just Victor, because obviously Victor is spread as thin as, pate. I had to try to tie something into his cooking class, but so a lot of resources, and so definitely take advantage of what Quali has to offer. And so that's sort of again a snapshot, a little bit about our IACUC migration and the process. I didn't want to get into too many weed details about stuff, but if anyone has questions about anything, either for IACUC or our planned IRB rollout, it's just fair game. I'm here. So whatever we can do. But I do thank you very much for your time. I know it's the end of the week here, and we've had a lot of information, so appreciate your time.
All right, last kind of go around for questions if anybody has anything.
Victor, I see you. Is there anything I forgot to mention?
No, I don't think so. I guess the only thing I would mention when Zach and Hamza were talking about new features, and Hamza talked about documentation. If you do have a customer success manager, a lot of times we'll bring kind of pre-release features to an implementation, where maybe we haven't hammered every bug out yet, or we're still kind of taking feedback. And a lot of times at that state, they don't have documentation yet. But I work with customers all the time, especially if we're early in an implementation, and I know that it'll be kind of finalized by the time they go live. But that feedback is invaluable. So, depending on where you are and how you're implementing, you can always talk to your customer success manager about anything that might be in a pre-release state.
Thank you. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Thanks so much for attending, everyone. Enjoy kind of the last few sessions that we have. And there's a wine tasting event tonight. I think it's a select few kind of limited spots. But thanks again, everyone.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Thanks, Hamza. Thanks, Victor.